Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to you, wherever you are in the world. I am Tigress Osborn, and I'm the chair of the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance, and welcome to the NAAFA Webinar Series. Our guest today is cartoonist and graphic novelist Barry Deutsch, who's going to be talking to us about his important work that includes fat visibility and lots of other topics. Before we introduce you to Barry and get started, just a couple of announcements. We are joined today by our friends from Pro Bono ASL, who are doing ASL interpreting for us. Our interpreters today are Junie and Christina, so we thank them for their hard work and all of Pro Bono ASL's hard work in making the world more accessible. Please support their work and please check out what they do at probonoasl.com. For those of you who are here for the first time and unfamiliar with NAAFA, the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance was founded in 1969, and since then we have worked through education, advocacy, and support to eliminate size discrimination and make the world a better place for fat people. This month is Fat Liberation Month, so all month long we have been celebrating the many ways that fat people thrive in spite of the challenges that we face because of the systems that are not made for us. If you've missed our activities so far, many of them are coming soon to our YouTube channel at NAAFA Official, and we do still have a few more activities this month, so you can find those at our website, NAAFA.org, or you can follow us on your favorite social media as NAAFA Official. Without any further ado, I should say to you that I am dialing in today from the greater Phoenix area, and I am on O'odham land. At NAAFA, it has been brought to our attention by members of our community that there is mixed reaction to doing land acknowledgements, which we do as a form of respect for the Indigenous folks whose land we're on, but that some people have expressed concerns about whether that is performative, whether it reinforces an idea that those folks were here instead of that those folks are here. So we encourage you to continue learning more about whose land you're on. We're going to continue exploring this important topic. And if you have feedback for us and you're here with us live today, we encourage you to include that on the feedback form at the end of the webinar. And if you're watching this later, you can give us feedback through our website if there are points about this important discussion that you want us to be considering. For now, we encourage those of you who are here with us to share with each other where you are from, whatever you call it, and whatever else it may be known as in the chat as you are getting to know each other. So now, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our special guest today. Barry Deutsch lives in Portland in a bright blue house with pink trim and varying numbers of house pets, housemates, and nieces. Best known in fat liberation communities for his political cartoons exploring medical weight bias and other challenges faced by fat people, Barry is also widely known for his popular comics Hereville, about yet another troll-fighting 11-year-old Orthodox Jewish girl, and Super Butch with Becky Hawkins, which is about a 1940s lesbian superhero protecting the bar scene from corrupt cops. Ladies and gentlemen, and friends of all gens, please welcome Barry Deutsch to the NAAFA Webinar Series. Barry, how are you today?
Hi, thank you for having me here. I'm very well.
Good. So let's get started by Barry's going to show us a little bit of his cartoons and some of his techniques a little later in the webinar. Before we get into that, Barry, tell us how'd you become the cartoon guy?
Well, I was a total comics nerd as a kid. My parents had a framed Pogo Sunday page on the wall. Pogo is a now very obscure comic strip, but it was one of the biggest and best known comic strips of the 1960s, beautifully drawn by a man named Walt Kelly, who my great aunt was his copy editor. So that was the connection that led to us having that page. But when I was a child, I would just stand on the back of the couch, so I was tall enough to look at it, and stare at this thing for hours. And it was fascinating to me. When you look at the original art, as opposed to what you see printed in a newspaper, you can see the blue pencil lines underneath the black ink lines where he had first sketched it out before he did the final inks. And you could see the places where he'd made mistakes, and cut out a new piece of paper to paste over the mistakes. It was an amazing introduction to the idea that comics were made by people, that it was something that could be made by people, not just something that magically appeared. I continued being obsessed as I grew older. When my parents wanted to punish me, they didn't ground me. They would take my comics and put them on the top shelf, which was too high for me to reach. Let's see. And so I just kept on doing it as a hobby, and with the intention of someday being able to do it professionally. And I guess about 12 years ago, I finally reached the point where I could earn enough of an income from comics to not need any other sorts of jobs. And
That's
here we are.
Exciting. That's pretty exciting. What now? But I know you got some recognition as a comic long before 12 years ago, because I think it was 2000. I think it was 2000 when you were a college student that you won the Charles Schulz Award.
That sounds very plausible. I don't remember the exact date, but yes, it was an award given by Scripps Howard for one college cartoonist a year receives the award. And it was really neat. They flew me out to Washington, D.C. They rented a tuxedo for me. Someone in a head-to-toe Snoopy outfit presented the award to me. And it was fun talking to her at the dinner afterwards. That's what she did for a living, all full-time, all year round, is she went to represent the Schulz family dressed as Snoopy at various events.
Wow.
So that was neat. And I've been lucky enough to win a few more awards and be nominated for more over the years, which is always very nice. I mean, in the immediate moment when I'm nominated for an award and lose, of course, that is terrible. The worst thing that's ever happened to any human being.
Ever.
But then a few minutes later, I calm down and realize that the whole thing is actually very nice.
Yes. Well, and we know that you have, regardless of awards and accolades, that you just have like this grassroots following of people who adore your work. And you actually have two very different audiences, because you create these political comments, which I imagine are mostly read by adults. And then you have, this fantastic young adult writing that you do. So how do you straddle those two audiences, well, actually, maybe before we talk about the audiences, we should talk about the content. Like how do you decide what you're going to draw about?
Well, boy, that's a kind of difficult question. To some degree, with the political cartoons, it used to be sort of dutiful, like, this issue is really important, I have to do a cartoon about that. And then I would force an idea, even if it wasn't very good. Or on rare occasions, someone would commission me to do a political cartoon about a particular subject. And over the years, I realized that I didn't like those cartoons. They came out poorly, and I'm embarrassed by the results. So nowadays, I actually try not to do that. It's not a matter of what I ought to do cartoons about. It's a matter of what I'm inspired to do cartoons about. So for the political cartoons, sad as it is to say, a lot of my process is going on the internet and getting pissed off.
Mm-hmm.
That is,
all of us do that. We don't all produce cartoons about it that help other people.
It's unfortunately a major source of my inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
So for that, for the Hereville books, it's really just a matter of trying to produce a fun, magical adventure comic that I, as a reader, would want to read. And when I first started doing Hereville, I didn't even know that it was for a kid's audience. The intended audience was me, and I just kept on doing it. And eventually some friends told me it was a kid's comic. And when I got an agent, hers was the important opinion. She says, well, there's one panel where someone swears and one panel is where someone smokes a cigarette. If you can change those two things, it's a kid's comic. And I said, okay. And I'm glad I did, because political cartooning is a dying art form. I love it, but economically, there's fewer political cartoonists earning a living at that every single year. Kids' graphic novels is a growing and thriving art form. And the transition from a dying art form to a living art form was amazing. Suddenly, not only was there an audience, but the audience was growing. And I could look around and see lots of people doing exciting work in the field rather than political cartooning. There are political cartoonists I like, whose work I like a lot, but it's a very small field. If I counted up every political cartoonist whose work I regularly follow, it's probably less than 30. Whereas I genuinely couldn't count the number of kids and young adult graphic novelists whose work I follow and like.
I knew that graphic novels were expanding for young people, but I actually went to get this copy of Hereville from my local library, which of course we encourage our supporters to go to their local libraries whenever possible. And I was excited they had all three of the Hereville books. There are three, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, so they had all three, and they had an entire section that was specifically dedicated to graphic novels in the junior books area, which I didn't know. I had ordered my my own copy from an independent bookseller that I love locally, but hadn't been able to get over there and pick it up from them. And so I hit my library, and I was super excited to see that they had your books and that they had this whole area of books like yours. Do you get to interact with the other artists that you admire, the other people in this young adult literature world, or the other political artists that you mentioned?
Sometimes, less so since the plague came and destroyed our civilization. Before that, there were comic book conventions, and that was a regular venue where I could meet other cartoonists who are doing the work I do, both political cartooning and kids cartooning. And that was really fun, but and it was mixed fun. I'm not a big fan of going to conventions socially. It's a lot of people at once, but meeting other people is fun, and being able to talk to people who had more experience in the business was a lot of fun as well, and useful. But it's not like I know everyone, but, just through the regular course of things, you run into people, you email with people, you end up at the same dinner with people. So that's nice.
How much do you find, either in the professional community or the fan community, that people understand both of those chunks of your work? Like, do they either know you as the Hereville guy or the political cartoonist guy, or are a lot of your fans really getting to see the breadth of what you do?
Typically, it's one or the other. And in some ways, that may be good for me. There was at least one case, the Beaverton Public Schools had me scheduled to come and speak to their students. And then I guess the vice principal Googled me and discovered my political cartoons. And 3 days before the appearance, they canceled it. So they just thought it was, they found there were swear words in some of those cartoons and so on. Usually they don't realize that I do both. Sometimes I'll be talking to someone at a con who does Hereville and about Hereville, and they'll pick up one of my political cartoon books and glance through it and be like, oh, you do these too? I've seen this one. And that's really nice. But it's two different audiences for the most part, and that's nice. It's nice feeling like there's a breadth of people I'm reaching, and no one has all interests. So at least I'm reaching people with 2 or 3 different interests. Yeah. I think that most of the Superbutch readers aren't aware of Hereville either, and most of them probably aren't aware of the political cartoons. But that's cool.
I don't have a copy of Superbutch to show off to folks, but you all should look that one up as well. How'd you end up writing about this anti-cop dyke superhero?
Lesbian superhero in the 1940s protecting the bar scene from corrupt cops.
I'm sorry, and
It's
she doesn't use the term dyke as a self-identifier. I put that on her. That's not part
uh,
of the
well, I mean, we haven't really seen much of her from her own perspective.
Okay.
So maybe she does. That was certainly a term people used in the 1940s. But in the story, the point of view character is someone else. So we don't, at least up to this point in the story, get to hear what Super Butch calls herself.
Gotcha.
But that's an idea that I had like, oh boy, 30 years ago or something, when I read the book. Oh boy, I'm blanking on the name of the book. I'll put it in notes later if I remember. I read a book which was an oral history of the lesbian bar scene in upstate New York. And there were so many fascinating stories in that. It was a brilliant book. But also I was reading this thinking, you know, these people are people who actually need a superhero. Like most superhero comics, if you look at them, it's like the editor of the Daily Planet and all the successful reporters are being protected by Superman. Or, you know, Bruce Wayne is protecting, you know, just whatever, but you never see superheroes protecting a community that's mainly under attack by the cops and by the mainstream of society around them. And in the 1940s, the oppression of queer culture and queer bars was frequently very, very violent. It was honestly a situation where superheroes are called for. So I had that idea so many years ago. And then I kind of forgot it until I was chatting about it. It came up in conversation with my friend Becky Hawkins. And Becky loves drawing two things above all else, which is old buildings and lesbians. So, and Becky is herself one of those two things. I'll let you guess which. And so we talked about it, and it was something Becky was eager to do. And Becky being interested in it made me eager to do it. And although the initial idea was mine, I would say the book, the story and characters are a collaboration between Becky and I. And Becky also collaborates with me on a lot of my political cartoons. And of all the people I've collaborated with, I think Becky is the closest to me in terms of our creative process. Mm-hmm. And I'm just thrilled to be able to work with her as much as I do.
Well, we're going to get to the visual piece of your creative process in just 1 second. I have one more question before we do that. So we've got the lesbian superhero, and we've got the Orthodox 11-year-old Jewish girl. And in your political comics, you do a lot of representation of underrepresented or marginalized communities. We see themes about autistic community. We see themes about transgender rights, about certainly about fat people. Where do you fit into all of this? I know sometimes in your political comics, we literally see you. We see a little Barry at the bottom telling us something about himself. But when we don't see that guy in the visual, where do you show up in all of this?
Well, I've been doing political cartoons for many years now. And over time, I've gravitated more and more to doing social justice topics more often than any other. Mm-hmm. And it took me a lot of years to figure out where I fit into that, because it can seem condescending or wrong to sort of, because I'm a white cis man. So who am I to be doing comics about racism and about about transphobia and so on? And eventually I realized that the way I was most comfortable thinking about it is that I'm not doing comic strips about Black people, for instance. I am doing comic strips about white racists. I am doing comic strips about my own people and what fools and assholes some of my own people are. And that made me feel a lot more comfortable, realizing that, you know, these aren't cartoons where I had to pretend to be something I'm not. These are cartoons where I just had to be a traitor to my own groups. And that is something that I'm very comfortable being. So that was very enjoyable for me once I began thinking of it that way.
I love
And
the
then
fact
there were,
that you use the word traitor instead of ally. We talk a lot about how, ally is the sort of 101 level. And that, that really we need more people to go to the level of being accomplices and traitors. So I love that you use that terminology. I think I interrupted you there.
accomplice, that's a wonderful word for it. I need to remember that. I mean, for me, I don't like to call myself an ally, but I sort of measure my success with many of the cartoons. For instance, you mentioned a recent cartoon I did, which is about some of the really jerky things that neurotypical people say to and about autistic people. And for a cartoon like that, the success for me is when it comes out, do I have a bunch of autistic readers saying, oh, yes, this is it, this is correct, or, oh, my God, I've experienced that, and so on. Mm-hmm. And if that happens, I feel that's been a successful cartoon to me. And if it doesn't happen, then I guess the cartoon's kind of a flop to me. Now, the exception to all this, the biggest exception, is cartoons I do about fat liberation, fat acceptance, because there I can be speaking as myself. And even though the cartoons that come out may not look very different, to me, that feels a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Because it's your own lived experience.
Right. And actually, because of that, it took me so many years to start doing it. I was so much more comfortable with everything else. And part of it is, this was many years ago, and it's sort of like, there's this process that I had to go through. And I know that other people have too, although not everyone, which is I had to come out as a fat advocate. It wasn't something I felt comfortable admitting in public at first. I read what felt like 400 books on the subject, and I thought about it for years. But the first time I showed an editor a comic with explicit fat acceptance themes, that was frightening to me. Beginning to talk about it to my friends was initially frightening to me, because I was worried that they would think I was ridiculous, or that I wasn't able to understand reality or whatever, because you are going against the mainstream beliefs that we're all raised in so strongly when you come out and say that you're in favor of fat liberation. So that's something that I had to take little teeny tiny steps towards in my cartooning at first. And then over time, I've felt more comfortable with it, until at this point, it's one of the topics I'm thinking, okay, I got to do some more fat liberation cartoons, because I love doing those. But it's been a long time getting to that.
When you started to take those baby steps, how were they received? How did that first editor respond, or what kind of reception do your fat liberation cartoons get?
The first editor responded initially poorly, I'd say. They rejected the cartoon. It was the first cartoon of mine that editor had ever rejected. So that was, and then there was a pause of 5 or 6 days. And then the editor emailed me saying, we've been talking about it, and we would like to print that cartoon after all. I've never asked the editor about the specifics of that, but I imagine there was a lot of conversation about the issue between him and the other staff members in that 4 or 5 days leading to that change of decision. Beyond that, of course, I've gotten the negative responses that you'd expect anyone to get. People commenting about how obviously I'm about to drop in a heart attack at 32 years old. I still get that one. I'm 52.
I know. You just love that when they're like, you're going to die by 30. And you're like, ha ha, 47.
I am living longer out of spite for you. But I also got some wonderful positive reception. I heard from both fat people and non-fat people. And that's been really nice. And I've heard from some fat people who have never before seen a pro-fat political cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a small thing, but it can be meaningful to people, and it's such a delight. And I've even heard from a few readers over the years who say that because they've been following my cartoons and my blog posts about this, that their opinion has shifted towards, and that they are now at least pro-fat acceptance. And that's been something really nice for me. So overall, I'd say the reception has been great, and I expect it'll continue being great. Except, of course, for the people who hate me, but those people are going to be terrible anyway. They hardly even count.
Let's go ahead and show people a couple of those cartoons in case we have folks who are with us who haven't seen your work on that particular subject. I asked Barry to show two of the cartoons that I know to be very popular in fat community because of the themes that they address. So we'll give Barry a second here. He's going to share his screen, and we're going to look at a couple of those, and then we'll look at a couple of stuff, a little bit about how Barry makes his art.
Okay, so this is probably the cartoon I've done with this theme that has gotten the best and biggest response. And the first three panels both show two people in what looks like a doctor's examination room. And there's someone who's obviously a doctor. She's wearing a long white coat and carrying a clipboard, and she's on the thinner side. And there's a fat woman sitting on the examination table. And she is, with bizarre calmness, holding one of her arms, which is completely bloodlessly disattached from her body, in her other hand. And in the first panel, the dialogue is, "Hi, I'm Dr. Douglas. What seems to be the problem?" And the response is, "I woke up this morning and my arm had fallen off." Panel 2, "I see. First thing, let's get you on a diet." "A diet? To reconnect my arm?" Third panel, "Your weight is a real issue here. How many times a day do you eat fast food?" And now angry, the patient responds, "I'm here about my arm." In the final panel, we switch to a different scene, the doctor alone in her office typing on a laptop. And we can see the words that she's typing, which is, "Patient was uncooperative."
And
So,
Kate in the chat says, yes, this one made its way around. It's so good. This one resonates with so many people because we recognize those experiences with doctors. Had you had I imagine it wasn't an arm falling off experience, but do you have experiences like this yourself with physicians?
I've had some in my life, less recently. I think that I've been very lucky. And also, I suspect in Portland, Oregon, where I live, doctors may be more likely to have been told that's not acceptable. Although, of course, that's a not average thing. Certainly, there are plenty of fat people here, as everywhere, who've had bad experiences with doctors and other medical people. But I've had a little bit of experience with this, but on the whole, I think I've been lucky. But it's impossible to be in fat acceptance communities talking about this stuff without hearing some genuinely nightmare stories.
Yeah.
And I think everyone here knows that. And so that's what really inspired this cartoon, because the basic complaint there, that no matter what you're in the doctor's office for, they see it as being about your weight, is experience and complaint that hundreds of fat people have. And that's always a sign that there might be a good subject for a cartoon there.
Yeah, I would say probably hundreds of thousands of fat people have experienced this in one way or another with the medical establishment. And I will also tell you, Barry, I don't know if I shared this with you, but we did some work with USC and some of their medical program with a doctor there. And we encouraged her to show this cartoon in particular to the doctors as a way of illustrating patient experience. Yeah, I think it can have great impact on medical professionals to see themselves satirized this way, or not even satirized. It just feels like documentary to me.
I think, yeah, no, I mean, it depends on the context of the circumstances, but there are circumstances where gentle mocking can actually be a useful teaching tool.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be done the right way, about appropriate subjects, and not in ways which are mean. But for some people, that is something that will get through their automatic defenses,
Yeah,
and it's something that they can listen to.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Let's look at your the other popular one that we asked you to share today. I think some of the folks who are here will recognize this one, or will recognize the experience in this one.
Okay, so this cartoon has more panels. It has 8 panels, and all the panels show the same fat woman talking to different people in each panel. At the top of the cartoon is a large caption that says, "What we tell fat people." And the first panel shows like a person, but with a television for a head, saying, "I'm popular culture, and I think you're sometimes hilarious, but mainly gross." And the second one shows a middle-aged man in a suit and tie saying, "I'm your workplace, and we all think you're lazy and stupid, and we pay you less." The third panel shows someone wearing an Uncle Sam hat and striped red and white trousers saying, "I'm the government, and I think you're a problem that needs to be fixed." The fourth panel shows a woman dressed in casual business wear, I'd say, with glasses, saying, "I'm smart people in the newspaper, and I'm concerned you're ruining our economy." The next panel shows a doctor holding a clipboard, and she's saying, "I'm your doctor, and to tell you the truth, you disgust me." The next panel shows an actual seemingly identical twin to the fat woman, who's holding up a fist and looking angry. And she's saying, "I'm your self-image. I want to puke every time I see a mirror." And the next panel, the second and last panel, shows a friendly fat woman who's spreading her arms in a welcoming way, saying, "Hi, I'm the Fat Acceptance Movement, and I think you're awesome." And for the first time, the main character of the strip, the woman who's been in every panel, is actually smiling. And the final panel shows all the other people from the previous panels coming up behind the main character, and main character's turning to look at them, looking a bit annoyed. And they're saying, "Don't listen to her. And she just wants to hurt you, you fat freak." And that is the end of that cartoon. And this cartoon is definitely a lot of autobiographical feelings going into this cartoon.
Biographical for me too, Barry. Thank you for creating this.
Okay. It's nice for me. I mean, you know, intellectually that there are people who share these experiences and share these feelings, but to actually put something into the world and have people come back and saying, "Yes, this has been my experience too," that feels good in some ways. It feels legitimizing. It lets people know that, it lets me know that I'm not alone, which is a lot of what I'm hoping these political cartoons will do, is just let some readers who see them know that they're not alone.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mentioned that's particularly beautiful for your when your readers from other types of your work discover these cartoons and then see like, oh, this person that I've idolized because because I love their fiction is like, they get some things about me in real life too. That's got to be really beautiful. So we're gonna so audience, we'll take questions from you in just a minute. In the meantime, Barry presents at schools often, and one of the things that the students often want to learn more about is how he creates his art. So he's going to share with us one of the things that he shares with many of his other audiences that's going to show us a little bit about his process. So we're going to go back to another screen share, and Barry's going to take us through a little bit about creating these visuals, and then after that, we'll use the remaining time to take some questions from the audience.
Okay, so this is a video of my drawing process. I draw entirely on computer. And this is at about 20 times actual speed. I don't really draw this fast, unfortunately. So you can see my first stage here is just scribble and erase, scribble and erase, scribble and erase. I am not a good enough artist to draw the correct lines straight off. What I need to do is this almost like sculpting in wet clay process of scribbling, erasing, and gradually finding my way to the right lines. And there are so few lines in the end that it's really important. There, the neck was too long, so I just lowered the entire head. There's a big advantage of drawing on computer. And I'm going to have Mirka, that's Mirka, the main character of the Hereville books, facing something with a frying pan. So I scribble in a monster, a big giant. And giants and other monsters are the most fun to draw because you cannot draw them wrong. You can give them a giant banana nose or huge bulging eyes, and it's fine. They're a monster. That's how they look. Now I'm just going to do some trees and hills in the background. And for my kind of drawing, I fortunately don't have to draw every little detail. Like I'm not drawing all these leaves. I'm just sort of doing these bumpy lines, and I'm depending on readers' imaginations to fill in the rest for me. And the same for the grassy edge of the hillside. I just do these little pointy lines, and hopefully everyone will fill it in. Now here I'm doing the final lines on top of all those scribbly blue lines. And you see that entire hand, that was only 8 lines. The entire face is only 10 lines, but I needed all those hundreds of scribble and erase lines underneath to know where to put the correct lines when I did the final lines. And so now that I have the basic lines, I'm going to do the monster first. And as I said, the monster is so much fun. You can see that like I don't always, some of these lines wound up in different places than my underdrawing, and that's fine. It's the monster. I'm going to do some solid blacks they help to hold the composition together if you have some solid blacks scattered throughout the drawing. Just a little bit of stuff on the grass. And now I'm going to start doing shading. And for shading, at least the kind of shading I do, I don't shade in everything because that would take way too long and be like I haven't shaded anything. I'm just trying to pick a few good places. I'm shading under the trees to give the trees kind of a rounder, more three-dimensional look. And the same thing for the hillsides here. Just a little bit of shading to make them look rounder. And with Mirka, a little bit of shading to make her look more formed and if she has more mass. With the giant, I'm going to shade a bit under the fingertips there to make him look like he's actually resting on the ground instead of floating over it. Now, next what comes is the colors. And with Hereville is generally colored by my friend Jake Richmond, but this particular drawing I colored myself. And I really like the thing of putting down a neutral color and then doing white and doing shading on top of it. So that's what I usually do when I'm coloring comics. And it's very important to me to think in terms of, I'm not a great colorist. I'm not going to be a wonderful painter, but what I can do is help readers understand what the forms are to make things look rounded and full, and to convey a bit of the mood, and to make sure that the characters who need to are standing out from the environment behind them. So that's very much what I'm thinking about once I'm doing it. Now, I actually did do the white spotting there, but it was so quick that it was impossible to see because speeded up 20 times, it just went by in a blink. But that is it. That is my regular drawing process. So let me go back to showing my wonderful face.
So how long, it took us just a couple of minutes to see that. How long does it actually take you to do that process?
Well, this was a very simple panel. There's only one figure and one face, and the backgrounds are natural forms, which are the easiest to draw. So I'm guessing this took only 2 or 3 hours to draw. Mm-hmm. A more complicated panel, one with a lot of figures in it, or Lord forbid, a house, could take hours more. I'm actually slowly beginning to sort of enjoy drawing in perspective, but it takes forever. It is not my comfort zone.
Do you always use the same program, or are there multiple tools you use? And what program is this? There's a question from our audience about what program you draw in.
Okay, so someone correctly said it looks like Photoshop. So what we just saw was Photoshop. However, in the years since I made this little film, I've mostly switched to a different program called Clip Studio Paint. Photoshop is a program that started out for photographers and sort of grew and evolved over the years to be a more general art tool. Clip Studio Paint was initially created for cartoonists, and it has many drawing functions in it, which are very convenient that Photoshop lacks. So I like that about it very much. But a lot of my collaborators have somehow resisted my proselytizing to them about Clip Studio Paint because they are foolish and everyone should write them and tell them that they're wrong. So for that reason, I'm still working in Photoshop, because if I'm collaborating with Becky or with Frank Young, who colors a lot of the political cartoons, I need to be switching back and forth because Photoshop is what they're equipped to look at.
Mm-hmm. And when you talked about looking at that pogo frame that your parents had and seeing the lines, was that the sort of analog equivalent of what we just saw you do here?
Yeah, but and it wasn't unique to Walt Kelly at all. There's the blue line pencils in a particular shade of blue were chosen because photo reproduction processes and even photocopiers do not pick up that shade of blue when if they're making copies in black and white. And so it's wonderful for that purpose. And that has been the standard in cartooning for decades. And for many cartoonists who work on paper, it remains the standard. And some people do a kind of in-between thing, like Becky Hawkins. Often she will do her first round of drawing, what we call the pencils, on computer. And then she'll print that out onto drawing paper in light blue ink. And then she'll take her India ink and her brush, and she'll do the analog drawing, as he said, right on top of that. So it's just another drawing tool. And it's one that people can mix into their process in a lot of ways.
Do you remember the first comic strip that you drew?
Wow. I'm going to guess no. I mean, because it was probably something I drew in kindergarten or in the second grade or something. Mm-hmm. And I don't really remember any of that. I remember drawing my ambitious but terrible attempts at Spider-Man comics when I was in the 7th or 8th grade. That's about the earliest comics I remember doing. And then in high school, me and my best friend, Brian, would work on comics together. And we actually did get as far as completing a couple of short stories. And for high school, that's pretty good.
Well, so you and I are pretty similar in vintage. I remember working on my high school yearbook in Aldous PageMaker. I'm imagining that when you were doing your high school comics, you were using not these digital tools. How has it changed your work over the years to have these digital tools available to you?
It's changed in a few ways. I mean, I am someone who makes a lot of fixes as I go along, and computers are great for that. There were actually some comics pages back in the older days where I actually erased some spots so much that I dug a hole all the way through the paper and had to paste new paper on top. Mm-hmm. And with computers, you don't have that. So it's helped me with that. It's helped me with, I used to do this thing where when I had the pencils done, I would take them to the local copy shop. And it's like, okay, this head looks a little bit too small. So I'm going to enlarge it by 10% on the copier. And then I'll take it back home and I will trace all of this onto a new paper so that I can have a single drawing where the head is about 10% larger this time. And I use what's called a light box, and light boxes were essential to my work, to being able to trace and fix and trace and fix. And that was in that film you just saw. The making mistakes and fixing and making the head lower on the neck and all that is just so much quicker and more convenient. So that's been helpful for me, being able to continually rewrite the text until the last moment, which is not something you like doing if you're hand lettering, is wonderful for me. It's actually made me feel like I'm going to be able to do this a lot longer, because I did not have great vision, and gets worse every year. But now with computers, I can be working on a little panel, effectively working on it huge. And the issue of can I see the lines finely enough is not going to be an issue. And as long as I don't actually go blind, I'm expecting I'll be able to continue drawing. So it's wonderful for that. And as far as my actual working process, it's changed a lot of things. Like the thing you saw me do where I actually drew the entire background behind Mirka and the giant, so I could then reposition them on the background. Obviously, when I was drawing on paper, that's not something I would do. Right. They would all be drawn on the single bit of paper. And maybe that's wasted a little bit of time because I'm drawing some stuff that'll be covered up. But it also gives me a lot of flexibility to move things around and adjust as I go along. So it makes a lot of difference. But I still have friends who are working entirely with pencil, pen, and paper. And it's still a legitimate and great way to produce comics.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I just want to go back to what you just said about how being able to do this work digitally enables you to overcome what could be like a disability access issue for you, as you know, as your eyes change over the years, right? I one of the things I really admire about your work is that not just in your content, but also in the presentation of your work, you're super attentive to accessibility in as many ways as possible. So you describe things for people who are listening. You include transcripts for people who are using screen readers. What Have you just always been that way? Have you always had that kind of awareness, or what is it that helped you become more aware that reader can be lots of different kinds of things, and that you want to make sure your work is accessible to all those audiences?
I would like to say it's always been like that, but it's a gradual process and is a still ongoing process. And it's just, doing the transcripts adds like a half-hour work to it for a simple cartoon, or maybe 20 minutes. And like a really complicated cartoon with like 20 panels or something, that could actually be an hour. And it's just something that had to become an ordinary part of my workflow. And that when I first began thinking I ought to do it, there was years between that and when I actually began. And part of it may be ADHD, and part of it may be just it takes a while to adapt your workflow. And I'm still working on it. I still will sometimes be reading something about how you should be doing transcripts, and I'll read it and go, oh, I've been doing this wrong for the last 5 years. But I think people like just seeing that at least I'm making the effort. I think it's, and now that I'm saying this, I'm realizing I should be increasing my efforts in some areas, but people are not looking for a reason to get angry, I find. Like, even when I mess up, people are generally nice about it. Like when they reach out to correct me. It's usually a nice process. I'm also finding that readers who don't need the transcripts often like them anyway. Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily understand why they do, but it's just one of these things where if you put the material out there, it turns out that it's not something used exclusively by vision impaired readers. Mm-hmm. A lot of readers get something out of it, and that's great. And I think that's true of a lot of accommodations.
Yeah.
Like you may be doing, like, to use an obvious example, automatically opening doors. You may be doing that specifically for people who can't easily open a door because they're disabled. But, you know, people with 5 bags of groceries they have to carry and will appreciate it. Once you put the tools out there, the people who need it for whatever reason will be using it. And the more people who are using it, who come to rely on it and expect those accommodations to be there, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. We find that with working with Pro Bono ASL, that even when we have folks who are here who don't need it, just knowing that they can then share it and other people will be able to utilize it, but also just in the case of Pro Bono ASL in particular, the energy that they bring to the events enhances the event, whether somebody needed them for accessibility reasons or not. And we see the same thing with our, you know, using image descriptions on things that we often ask our presenters to provide the image description themselves, so that we're making sure that we're using the language that they want to use to describe themselves. And then we learn things about the language that they want to use to describe themselves, right? So I just want to echo what you said there.
Okay. Can I interrupt for a moment? We only have a couple minutes left, and there's a question that just came up on the text I want to answer.
That's where I was going next. So great.
Okay. Elaine Lee asks, do you have any plans to create new characters for young adult or adult graphic novels? Any fat characters? For reasons mainly of attention deficit disorder, I find it's harder for me to do 140 pages than to do 140 short form for 10 panel comics. And that limits how many graphic novels I'm going to be doing. But when I did Hereville, I didn't write in any fat characters. And I regret that so much now, but it was frankly before I was consciously thinking about these issues nearly enough. And that's the reason. I do have a new project I'm discussing with a major project now, which would have a fat main character and also be expressly touching on a lot of fat acceptance issues. But the thing is, a lot of these, whether or not that will actually come into a printed graphic novel that you can get in bookstores, remains up in the air. It's still early stages. But I definitely would like to, and any new graphic novel universe I create from now on will definitely have some fat characters and not playing the embodiment of despair or anything like that.
That was a great final question from the audience. Barry, is there anything that I or the audience did not ask you about that you want to make sure that our participants get to hear about today?
No, it's been really fun, but I feel we've covered some really neat material here, and I don't have anything specific I'd like to add.
Will you remind folks where they can find you online if they want to see more of your work?
Sure. Well, the political cartoons you can find several places. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, leftycartoons.com, and you can also read them all for free at my Patreon, patreon.com/Barry. And if people would like to support me there, I'm supported nearly entirely there by $1 and $2 pledges. And I love that. I think the idea of just being supported by tiny donations by lots of people is an awesome thing. And I'm so cheered by that. So if you want to, that's great, but you can read all the cartoons for free there regardless. Pardon me, Super Butch. The easiest place to find it is superbutchcomic.com.
And live today, Darlene has put those links in the chat for you.
Thank you, Darlene.
If you're watching later on YouTube, you will find them there too. And
Hereville isn't available online, but literally any place that you buy ebooks or physical books will have them, and many libraries have them as well. Okay, not everywhere has them, but everywhere either has them or can order them.
Definitely check your local library and your favorite independent booksellers for copies of Hereville. Barry, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure to have you with us. We also, of course, want to thank Christina and Junie from Pro Bono ASL. And we want to thank all of you. As Barry said, Barry and I just talked about this right before our session today about the $2 donors. We also love our small donors at NAAFA. And we are mostly supported by small donors at NAAFA. If we are able to offer these webinars free of charge to the community because of that kind of support. If it is, if that is something that you would like to do, you can give to NAAFA at naafa.org/give. Once again, we thank you all for joining us for the NAAFA Webinar Series. Happy Fat Liberation Month to you. Be sure to follow us on social media at NAAFA Official, or visit our website for other upcoming events for the rest of Fat Liberation Month and for the rest of the year. We will see you next time on the NAAFA Webinar Series. Take care, everyone.